everyone, Lisa here with you today on the Crafty Meraki YouTube channel. I thought for today's card I would do some stamp layering, so I'm going to be using the Imperial Gardens stamp set, and I will also be using a sentiment from the Paper Hugs stamp set. So I'm going to start off with the stamp layering, and for that I'm going to be using these sets of inks from Pinkfresh Studio. And I'll just quickly show you the back of the packaging for the stamp set. So you've got the layering guide there, which shows you really clearly how to use each individual stamp and how to line those up. I'm going to start off by stamping the outline image of both the flower and the leaves. So just removing those from the packaging and laying them down onto my white cardstock. So for my stamping today, I'm using Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I will do all of the stamping in the MISTI, which is a really handy tool for any stamping, but particularly if you're stamp layering. So just making sure my panel is in the corner there, and then I'm going to take some Memento Tuxedo black ink. I'm just going to ink up my stamps, and then I'm going to press those down onto the cardstock. And just making sure here that I've got a good ink coverage on my stamps before I press those down. And I will go ahead and double stamp these two images just to make sure that I've got a really crisp black image for both. And as you can see there, I do actually miss a little bit off on the leaves, so it's just as well I went back and stamped again. So now we're going to move on to the second layer for both the flower and the leaves. So this is the solid stamp for both. So this is going to be my lightest colour. So for the flower, I'm going to be using the sparkling rose colour, and for the leaves, I'm going to use grassy knoll. So because these are solid stamps, I want to make sure that I've got really good coverage on that surface, and so I do go over these a number of times with the ink pad. And I am actually going to be double stamping each layer because I really want my flowers to be bright and vibrant. So just inking up those two stamps again, going to press those down, and you can see how much that darkens that layer just by double stamping. So we're going to move on to the next layer now, just lining up my next stamp for the leaves, and the stamps just kept getting stuck to my fingers today. My hands were actually really cold when I was filming, but still the stamps kept on getting stuck. I don't know if this happens to everyone, but anyway, I do eventually get them lined up, and I'm going to add on my medium colour now. So for the greens, I'm using key lime, and for the pinks, I'm using bubble gum. So just inking up those stamps there, and I'm going to press that down. And as I mentioned before, I will do a double stamp again, just to make sure that you could really see a definition between all of those layers. So I'm going to move on now to the final layer of the flower. So just lining up that final stamp there, and I've left the other leaf stamp in the MISTI, and I'm just going to now pick both of them up. So for the flower, I'm going to put my third colour on, and that is Raspberry Bliss. But for the leaves, I'm actually just going to add a little bit of olive into the centre of that leaf stamp. So it's the same layer as I did earlier, but I'm just darkening it a little bit with the olive. And again, I do that twice. And you can see there, it just adds a little bit more definition and interest to the centre of that set of leaves. So now that I've finished those first two images, I'm going to go ahead and stamp another couple of leaves. And I've got a little trick here that I picked up from Jennifer Maguire. And I've just taken that outline stamp for the leaves, stamped it down, flipped my panel, and I'm going to re-stamp it in the other corner. So I haven't moved that from my MISTI lid. And this is really going to help me move through the rest of the stamping really quickly. I just have to line up the stamp once each time and then flip the panel and it will be in exactly the right place. So I am going ahead and double stamping everything as I did before, just to make sure that all the leaves look the same. I have sped this up a little bit just to save a bit of time, and I was having one of those days filming. Every time I lifted my stamps up with the MISTI lid, it would bring my paper up at the same time, so I had to keep putting the card back in the corner, putting the magnet back down again. I'm sure everybody has this problem again, but my stamps seem to be ultra sticky. Anyway, I'm moving on to the flower centre now. I'm using a couple of Altenew inks here. The first layer is Warm Sunshine, and then I will go in with the second layer, and that is with Caramel Toffee. And that brings us to the end of the stamping of all of the images. So I take the coordinating dies here, just tape those down with some low tack tape, and then I run those through my Gemini Junior. So these are all ready now. We're going to start work on our background. I've temporarily adhered my panel down onto my glass mat, and I'm now going to go ahead and create a border with masking tape. So this is a low tack tape, and I'm using the lines on my grid mat to make sure that I get a 1/2 inch border. And I do actually run that tape over my jeans 2 or 3 times before I put it down on the cardstock, just to try and take some of that stickiness off it. And we're going to move on to our ink blending now. And I'm using a couple of aqua inks from Altenew. The first layer, which will be my lightest layer, is Aqualicious, and I'm using a blending brush for my ink blending today. My second colour is Teal Cave, but I will speed the blending up a little bit, just because this did take me about maybe 8 or 9 minutes to blend, and I didn't want you to have to watch that in real time. But whilst I'm blending, I thought I would talk a little bit about recreating cards. And this is something that I do every now and again when I can't think of where I want to go with a card, I've lost a little bit of my mojo, or I'm just simply in a hurry. I go back through my Instagram feed, sometimes for a couple of years worth of cards, and I see which card I might like to recreate. So once I've found that, I think about changing the stamp set and changing the colours. So I will more often than not keep a similar design, but I'll change the card up just with the colours and by using a different stamp set. And that's really what I'm doing with today's card. I've created an ink blended background, an ombre blend. So my darkest colour is in the bottom left hand corner, and I'm fading that out towards the top right. And it's a really nice backdrop for any floral images. So I'm just going in now with my lightest aqua again, and that is Aqualicious, just to make sure that I'm going to be able to see the blue all around the flowers once I add those to the panel. And as with any masking, the magic happens when you start to remove that tape or that mask. And I've actually left this footage here as real-time footage. I haven't sped it up at all. I wanted to show you exactly how long it took me to remove the tape from the top of my panel. I think when you spend all that time blending, you really want to be double sure you're not going to ruin your panel. All too often I have taken my masking tape off too quickly and I've ripped the cardstock. I mean, it's not the end of the world. You can always cut that panel down and layer it up onto your base if you want, so it wouldn't go to waste. But I do really like the look of a masked area on my panel, so I was extra careful to make sure it didn't rip. So we're going to move on to our sentiment now. This is the Paper Hugs stamp set and I'm going to use the With Love sentiment. So just popped my panel into the MISTI and I've laid my flower down so I can see where to position that stamp, and I'm just going to ink that up with some VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink, which is a really nice crisp black ink. And we're going to start assembling the card now. So I've put some foam tape on the back of my flower and I'm just going to add that down onto my panel. I'm being quite careful here just to make sure I've positioned it exactly right before I press that down. And now we're going to add our leaves. So I'm just adding some wet adhesive onto the back and I'm just going to slip those under the flower. So that one tucked under really nicely, and so does the second set of leaves as well. But I do actually end up trimming the third set just to make those fit the panel, and also because I had some foam tape behind the flower that wouldn't allow me to push it under any further. So I just trimmed a little bit off and I'm just going to slot that down under the flower towards the bottom of the card. And naturally, because I had the camera on, this didn't go quite as smoothly as I would have liked, and I ended up dropping those. Fortunately, it dropped in the right place, so I was able to just press that down on the panel. And I'm going to finish the card off by adding some Fairy Garden Meraki Sparkle gems. And it was at this point I realised I hadn't added the flower centre onto the flowers, so I popped a little bit of foam tape onto that and I just positioned that down over the top. And that brings us to the end of today's card. So I hope that you've enjoyed seeing the card come together and it gives you some ideas for your floral stamps. I will be back again with another card for you in a week or so, but in the meantime I hope that you have a wonderful day.